Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be doing two speedy book reviews. The first book is What You Are Looking For Is in the Library by Michiko Aoyama, and the second one is The Last Children of Tokyo by Yoko Tawada. Both Japanese authors. It was kind of unintentional. I've been reading a lot of Japanese fiction recently, historical fiction, contemporary fiction, and it just kind of turned out that both of these books were books that I read near each other. So I thought let's bundle these two up together and give you two quick reviews. Now, What You Are Looking For in the Library is a really wonderful story about the average person trying to survive in everyday modern Tokyo. It is a collection of 5 stories that are all interconnected by this one individual who essentially acts as this kind of librarian. She manages this library and she interacts with each of these 5 characters and basically helps them realize something about themselves. We follow different characters at different points in their life. We follow a young man who works in an office as an accountant. We follow an older retired man as he comes to terms with the fact that he's no longer working and he's kind of seen as a burden on society. We also follow a young woman and her relationship with her husband and her child and how that kind of becomes under strain. We follow a bunch of different stories that just feel very relatable, I think, to anybody and could be any one of us, but just probably in a different city. And I just really like the way that Michiko really captured the human experience in a very sensitive but also very raw, unfiltered way. I think each of these characters have very interesting struggles. I think the one that I actually related to the most was the story about the old man who has retired. And Japan has a very interesting work culture. It's very intense, to the point where it's pretty toxic. And people, when they work for a big Japanese corporation, they basically stay with that corporation for life. You know, they stay there pretty much their entire career. In theory, they get a lot of really great benefits, but you know, the work hours, the working on the weekends, it is very much an expected part of Japanese culture. And this one character that we follow, he's just retired, and he talks about how his life just feels very empty without his job. And he was a pretty senior figure at this company, but yet as soon as he leaves, he's essentially forgotten. He's essentially seen as the spare part. He doesn't really have a place, so his sense of self is really tied to his work. And as somebody who loves what I do, very different context in the sense that, you know, I'm my own boss, I love what I do, and I really get a kick out of building things and building teams and working with really nice, smart, kind people. Very different to Japanese culture in that sense, I would say. I think there's a lot of toxicity in Japanese work culture and Southeast Asian work culture in general. But this whole idea of me retiring just honestly doesn't even it's something that I laugh about, that I will just never stop working. And that's probably true because it's part of me in a way that is so fitting. I don't know, it's just a part of who I am. I've always been like this since I was a child. I've always liked working on things. I've always liked exploring new things, learning about new things, meeting new people. So in that sense, we're different. But the whole idea of just not being a contributing member of society in the way that is expected, and the way that society perceives you as differently when you go past that point, I just thought was super fascinating, super fascinating, because there is this intrinsic focus on work and the output that you produce as an individual. And the thing that I thought about it was, do I really like the idea of living in a society that only values me for my output? What about my output in other ways? Not just in terms of my monetary output. What about the way that we make people feel, or the way that we help our local community, or the way that we try to solve problems when big things happen? The thing that happened a few years ago, I'm not going to say the word. That was the one that specifically resonated with me a lot. I think each story will resonate with everybody in a different way. I do think all the stories were equally good, to be very clear. I just think you will relate to certain stories better because of the specific themes that they're covering. I really enjoyed it. This is a translated book, obviously, so I can't really speak to Michiko's writing style, but the translation was really solid. I felt like it was really easy to consume and get through, and I don't know, it just felt like each story just felt like a little bit of a warm hug, and I really valued it. It's definitely what I needed at the time, and I definitely recommend it for maybe when you need a bit of inspiration, or you just want a bit of a pick-me-up, because it definitely is that. I gave this one, I think it was a 4 stars. I just thought it was a really solid collection of short stories, and I think every single one of them was pretty well done. The second book that I'm going to review is The Last Children of Tokyo by Yoko Tawada. I actually pronounced it wrong at the start. I'm learning Japanese at the moment, and I'm trying to make sure that I say the names and the places in the right way, the way that the Japanese say it. So scratch the way that I said it at the start of this video. It's Tokyo, not Tokyo. This is a dystopian book centered around a version of Japan, or a version of Tokyo, where essentially things are no longer functioning in the way that they should be. It's what happens when climate change essentially gets to the point where cities no longer become the very habitable places they are in a normal functioning environment. This is a story really about the kind of struggle of human interaction and being able to protect your own and survivor instincts that we all have. But in this scenario, it's obviously amplified hugely because there is danger at every corner. We follow our main character, Yoshiro, who is essentially tasked with looking after an orphan boy called Mumei. Mumei has a lot of health issues, and he's young, right? Bear that in mind. But Yoshiro, he's like over 100 years old, and he's really like in good shape. He's like the epitome of health. So we have this really interesting dynamic that Yoshiro, who's over 100 years old, is like the epitome of good health, contrasts with Mumei, who is like a teenager, I think it is, but he is constantly ill, he's vitamin deficient, and he's just like the complete antithesis of Yoshiro in like every way. The reason why he's like that is because of the scenario that I mentioned at the start, which is that we're living in a version of Tokyo where the sun no longer comes out as often, and where the biological ecosystem of the planet is no longer working in the way that it should. And so we have these kind of like microcosms across Tokyo, across Japan actually, that we learn about. And they all function as these kind of separated communities, and there's trade between these communities, but we're really focusing on Tokyo specifically. We get other mention of other places like Kyoto and Osaka. I think Tawada does a really good job of making Tokyo feel very grim, but there's still hope. Like there's still moments of hope. There's still, we still have these moments of characters interacting with each other. They're trying to survive, but they're also trying to live at the same time. But the thing I found most interesting was the fact that we don't get tons of context on the lead up of the events to the present day that were presented in the book. So we don't really know what has happened to get the characters to the point. We know that the world has collapsed, but the fact that we just kind of get this insight into Mumei and Yoshiro, and he's just happened upon this orphan and he's basically trying to keep him alive, it's just fascinating. I think dystopian books in general tend to a lot about human interaction and about how people come together, but also how people don't come together, and they, you know, battle against each other and fight against each other in ways that probably don't actually make sense, because if people band together, it's actually better for the greater good. But I really just like the way that Yoko Tawada really just covered a lot of the thematic work, specifically about how fragile our biological ecosystem is, but also about how the children of today are going to have to live with things that are completely out of their control, and how we have a responsibility as the older generations to fix these problems, or at least implement measures that can help fix these problems, or at least minimize the damage that is going to be caused. And I just thought it was covered in a way, I've said this before, that didn't feel preachy. It was more just making us aware of the role that we all play in instilling change into our planet. And I really liked it. Like, I really enjoyed it. This was also a Japanese translation, and the translation was fantastic. It did feel a little bit dry in certain places, but I just think that was because of the topics that were being discussed, and it wasn't the end of the world. Like, I thought it was really solid as a Japanese dystopian story goes. And I'm really curious to see what Tawada has written, because I really liked the way the story was specifically told. The writing style, like I said, was a little bit dry, but again, I think that was just due to the subject matter, not because of their writing specifically. I gave this book a 4 stars, I think it was, and I really liked it. Like, I thought it was a really good take on the kind of situation that we have at the moment with fragility of our biological ecosystem. I just think it's such a fascinating insight, and I do think it's a version of the world that we're probably not that far away from, which is slightly terrifying. So there we have it. Those are 2 Japanese contemporary fiction books that I have read recently. Let me know if you have any questions down below, but I definitely recommend checking both of these out. I think they cover very different things, but both written very well, both executed very well, and both cover interesting themes nonetheless. Stay safe, everybody. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.